All right, folks, let's get underway talking about navigating the future of networked AV, the challenges and opportunities. As the AV industry rapidly evolves, the integration of networked AV systems has become crucial for delivering seamless, scalable, and efficient solutions. So let's explore the current and future needs, and challenges associated with networked AV technologies, and delve into the complexities of designing and implementing networked AV systems. To discuss this further and to introduce the panel, would you please welcome from Interactive Media Solutions, John Bigelow.
Thank you very much. Now, I could sit here and introduce the panel, but they're going to do a much better job of introducing themselves than I will. So I'm going to throw to you, Zach, first, and then Frederick, and then Kyle. You can tell us a little bit about your background.
All right. My name is Zach Sook. I'm the Director of Product Management at Biamp. I've been with Biamp a number of years, almost 18 years now. I started in tech support, so I've had some experience in troubleshooting and designing AV networks for our customers and internally for ourselves. And then I moved to the product side and have been focused on how we distribute networked AV across all of our product lines.
Okay, and my name is Frederick Norman. I'm the Global Product Manager for Network Audio at Axis Communications. So I've been with Axis about 21 years in total, started back in 94 as a programmer, and I've been had a different roles since then, working in a little bit in sales, business management, and now in product management. So my summary, my experience is mostly about IoT in different ways, working with print servers, storage, cellular technology, and cameras, and now with audio.
My name is Kyle Barron from Harman. I'm the product manager for SVSI for Network AV. I've been there for just over 8 years at this point. Prior to that, I was a network architect and an engineer for the network side. Started off Harman as a technical trainer, dealing with Network AV with SVSI. So I've evolved my role up there.
All right, excellent. So we're going to start off by setting the scene. In one sentence each, starting with you, Zach, in one sentence each, what's the biggest thing that has changed in network AV design in the last 12 months, and what's still stubbornly the same?
What's changed the most? And well, I think I'd start with the second. What's stubbornly the same? It's the push towards standardization that never seems to happen. I think the best thing about standards is we have so many of them, right? But I still see that struggle persisting, although there's always a push to get to the next interopt situation. Everybody, still focuses on, well, I have my network protocol and you have your network protocol, and there's still a push to get that together. I think we'll talk about a little bit of some of that standardization and what the attempts are to go towards that. So I think that's kind of the answer to both of these. It's another thing that we're seeing more and more opportunity to go to, but still stubbornly the same in the fact that they're still so isolated.
Well, we will absolutely get to that. In fact, we will blow your hair back with more acronyms than a government agency conference by the end of this. But Frederick, in your opinion, same thing. What's changed and what's stubbornly stayed the same?
Well, I'd like to focus a little bit more about different industries. I mean, I'm more in the network public address area, and I've seen a great shift the last year, maybe year and a half, between the different industries, security industry and public address, how these industries, go together, and how traditional Pro AV companies start to focus more on the security aspect of what we do. And this also, I think, what you explain here about standardization, it's also a big push in different areas to get sense of things.
Zach, it's Kyle, over to you.
Yeah, definitely. I would agree with, with Zach too, is that the standards are still one that is stubbornly elusive to a lot of folks. One of the big ones though for me has been a big focus and push on the security side, with devices being put onto the network, and those protocols that have to be put in place to keep that data secure. And that's really becoming important more and more so when the convergence that happens of all those signals are now on the wire, and working with IT to understand what that is.
I think that's a good point, actually. We're seeing a bunch of the strength in the AV industry to start talking about that security. It's always been something we've kind of tried to stay out of, and it's not something we're experts on, but we're forced to get there. And I think
Well,
we're getting-
we will get
yeah,
there.
yeah, we have.
Is this an AV issue or an IT issue? So we will get there. Okay, so I'm going to throw back to you for this one, Zach, because you've got a background in Tessera and TC5D bridging and all the rest of it. So, and then we'll go to the rest of the panel. But when you hear a brief that says Dante here and then AVB/Milan there, and we need it to be one system, what's the cleanest supported way to do it that today? And where are the sharp edges in that sort of design?
You just buy a Biomp unit and then you can do it for you. But that is the thing. There's complexities in that. It's not just like, oh, I can have this network here and this network here. As soon as you bridge those, you have to take into account the clocking mechanism, the discovery domains. You have to slave one clock to another, right? So
Yep.
you have to find devices that enable you to do that bridge. And there's plenty of them out there, some from Biomp, some from Harman, I'm sure. And I think manufacturers like Biomp, Harman, and others are allowing that to become easier. But there's still education that has to happen around that. So you have to be aware of that. So for example, you would, I'll use Biomp just because I'm familiar with it, and feel free to add in some Harman ideas, but we have devices that have dual network ports because we have different media networks. And then within that, the software, you need to know, like, what is my master network? How do I deal with PPV traffic and clock from one to the other? Master-slave relationships, even on that network, have to be accounted for. So the mechanism to do it is generally finding a device that is a good bridge and that gives you the options and levers to pull so you can make some decisions on how those two networks interact. And they're out there. So the most AV DSPs, I think we'll say it generically enough, give you that opportunity to manage that. But there's some education behind it, and obviously support from those manufacturers is essential for that as well.
Yep. Cole, you look eager to jump in.
Yeah, I definitely think the education piece is key, right? I think a sharp edge, when it comes to not just AVB, Milan, and then Dante and mixing of signals, right? It comes down to architecture of the network, right? Where that clock gets put, right? Where the top of it is for the network, right? Because you can daisy chain things out, and now you've got clocking issues along the way with signals trying to get back to a core switch or an aggregation switch. So education is key, and especially within our AV industry, we're not network engineers, right? We're not network architects, right? 5-wire BNC was the thing, back in the day. So, it's that convergence that has to happen, and to be able to bring forward that education to make sure the network is robust. Otherwise, signals won't go anywhere if the network can't support it.
And I maybe to add to that too, I think we talk about, Milan, AVB, Dante, they're standards. So it's easy to talk about that, but it's almost that every system is bridging now, because you're going to go into manufacturer-specific protocols, which exist. Everybody's got their own personal protocol. Biomp has it, Harman has it.
We have our own discovery protocols and things like that.
And then we have to consider, how does that interface with Dante or AVB or whatever other protocol. So the need for this knowledge is almost essential at this point, just because it happens all the time.
Yep. Frederick, I know you deal a lot more with sort of designing large systems for many, many speakers and zones and all the rest of it. Is this an area that you're dealing with much, or?
Yes, it definitely is. And I think it's interesting, different industries have had their own history of using different protocols. So, looking at the security industry, we'll be using ONVIF and BICS, looking at the intercom space and telecom, they're using SIP protocols. And you guys are having your entire own suite of different protocols. So, and now all of this is starting to merge together. We need to talk more to each other. So, the way we solve it at our end is essentially that we make sure that we can bring input. We're compatible as input with different protocols, and also on the output end. So our servers become the central point, central hub of doing that switching.
And I think the big thing you said there, Frederick, was standards, right? I think that's, making sure that what we do as manufacturers is a standard, and we don't go off and create something unique, because then we create essentially issues down the line.
Yep.
Yeah, well, because kind of one-off, right? If you have to implement a proprietary protocol, Maybe you do it for one customer, a very big one, important one, but it's a one-off. I mean, working in the long term with open protocols is definitely the way to go.
Well, speaking of standards and protocols, IPMX keeps gaining steam as the Pro AV friendly take on ST2110. What real-world trigger would you specify, or what real-world trigger would make you specify IPMX over today's dominant stacks? And what would you still avoid? And Kyle, I'll throw to you on this one first.
So, I mean, for us, for me, I've been, looking at IPMX for many years. I think the one thing that I do like is the ability for a software-defined platform that it supports. I think though that for me today, it's still very new. The ratification of the standards just happened in 24 at ISE, right before ISE in February of 2024. So it's still very much in the discovery phase. There's a lot of platforms that are essentially benchmarking and, that are out there right now for IPMX. But, I think that a lot of the mainstream manufacturers are still looking at what the possibility is there. Essentially we're now trying to decide on a standard, right? We've always had a codec issue and a question when it comes to what codec do I use, and now we're getting into what standard do I use, right? So trying to avoid a lot of the confusion, I think, is important too as manufacturers to make sure that, we're not leading the market astray, if you will, or causing confusions.
Yeah. Fredrik, your thoughts?
I was thinking, I mean, is it education that is needed, giving guidelines to customers in order to for them to select what you think is the preferred protocol?
I think that is education, right? I think that it's, but it's also understanding kind of what the scenarios are that those signals need to be done in. Every codec, essentially has its place and purpose. Every standard has its place and purpose, but understanding what those are would come down to education. Yeah.
Kyle? Oh, sorry, Zach.
No problem. We've, so much like,
We switch.
Yeah.
It's all right.
I'm no expert in that protocol, to be honest, but, I do think looking at the future of it, I can't speak to the technical side of it, but the adoption rate is probably still a ways out. And I think it's just because of the natural, it's the same as when Dante came out or when AVB, it's going to take time to understand from a manufacturer's point of view. Then we're going to start to implement. And then once we start to implement, people using the protocols and stuff are going to have to start getting used to it. I think it's a couple years out before we really hit a full-on market approach, at least from Biome standpoint, before we start implementing things that might utilize those solutions. So for that protocol in particular, I think it will be just like other protocols of the past. It's going to take a little bit.
Yeah. All right, Fredrik, this is specifically I'll start with you on this one. Axis Audio Manager Pro advertises management at enterprise scale up to 5,000 speakers over 500 plus zones. In a deployment that size, what breaks first at that size multicast design? Is it the PTP, NTP discipline, or change management? And how do you de-risk that sort of scale?
I think my answer here would be wildly different compared to you guys at that scale. Because the way we design our product, by focusing on the public resolutions, they are less sensitive. I mean, we're targeting a solution that needs to be very robust at a large scale. So we design and optimize our product to be sensitive to different delays in the system. So things like the clocking is not really something that affects us that much. We do require NTP, all the devices that needs to be set up. But usually in the end, the limitations is in the customer's network. I mean, how far can you stretch your multicast boundaries so that your implementation becomes efficient? And if you're stubborn and don't allow multicast on your network, that's where you get into the real scalability problem, because you need to switch to unicast, and running 5,000 simultaneous audio streams on the network, that's going to tax the system and your servers. And we've done implementations where we do far more than 5,000. Our largest system today is about 28,000 speakers in a single system, but it takes a lot of servers and a lot of work to get the network working with that.
I would second that, actually, that the network is the troublesome part. And Biamp has long been an advocate of AVB, and now Milan as well. The point of that standard was to take some of the mystery out of that and to manage the network sort of automatically. Now, AVB also has the stigma of requiring special switches, which was more of a problem in the past. I think now if most switch manufacturers can support that, and enable it. But behind the scenes, what happened is you have bandwidth management, and you are warned when you're about to do something that you're not supposed to do. There's a very precise quality of service management. You can prioritize traffic. Its beauty is that it let other traffic exist with your media traffic, and it would watch that and maintain that. And of course, timing protocols. There are ways to not use so much multicast traffic and have a sort of peer-to-peer relationship on some of the timing, and only the broadcast domain only has to exist devices that need that broadcast domain. So there are ways and standards and protocols that enable that management of the network deployment. I look at AVB Milan as a way that you could do that. It's the network is aware of what you're doing, and it can sort of help you avoid pitfalls. So
yeah, I mean, I would definitely say, the key here that, for me, that I'm hearing a lot is the network, right? I mean, if you're only as good as your network at that point, right? For all these signals, and being able to take multicast, to the edge and beyond is important to be able to control bandwidth, right? But with a lot of advanced techniques dealing with P2P and dealing with IGMP, and at the different layers, we can extend that functionality out further. But again, it comes back to the deployment, right? And how reliable that is in the end.
Yeah, I think if I had to say the three things that we get calls on, and I don't know if I'm saying these in priority order, but it's network deployment, physical network setup. And then from the audio standpoint, it's clocking. I get ticks and pops and stuff. And then you got to go figure out clocking problems and who's master clock and stuff. The last one is bandwidth. It's not functioning because I've overrun the pipeline that I have. So, but that said, the protocols are very good. In whatever standard you have, they're smart. They know what they're doing behind the scenes. It's the problems that come up, and I think it's those three things that typically.
A lot of it's the physical, layer one, if you will, of the actual architecture and the deployment is what it comes down to.
Well, on the subject of architecture, and I'll stick with you for this, Zach, you can kick us off. Give us your default reference architecture for a 200-room campus migrating from HD-based T to AVO over IP. This year, is it VLANs, IGMP, QoS markings, and where do you jump to a 10 gigabit network?
For better or worse, I think the default that we're seeing is isolation. They're air-gap networks. Most people are saying, unfortunately, and I think that we need to evolve this, but most people are saying, oh, well, you have a isolated media network. I won't let you interfere with my corporate network or control network. I think that isolation is now, we've evolved a bit from a completely air-gap network to now utilizing either different broadcast names, different subnets, or VLANs at that point. So I think that's becoming pretty common. But more and more, we have to start looking at how do we converge real traffic, because you mentioned 200 rooms. What if I'm not on the same subnet or broadcast domain? What if I'm on a campus and I need to go across the network? The ability to just isolate is not available there. We've got to find a way that we can coexist with regular network traffic and do that in a smart manner. So I think protocols are getting there, and AV is getting more educated on that, and we have to deal with is not the right word, but work with the IT people to become smarter ourselves and come up with suggestions and help lead that conversation.
It's just damn IT people again.
We love them.
So just to add to that, right? I would definitely say that, switch manufacturers have evolved greatly in helping our industry accomplish a lot of these tasks, right? Netgear and their Pro AV UI is phenomenal at, making what used to be CLI Cisco configs that, only Cisco experts could navigate very easy and intuitive at this point, right? So I've seen that transition come through. I mean, we're seeing a little bit different on our side rather than, completely air-gapped networks, right? I mean, they are converged, if you will. But, a standard, recommendation, from our side is that you should have a minimum of 2 VLANs, right? A control, and then a video and an audio, depending on that. Or at best case, you have 3, right? A control, a video, and a Dante or an audio VLAN. And then you can, of course, allow that traffic in between if you need. But, that way your traffic is separated. It is protected. You can do your QoS, and maintain the priority on that for clocking and avoid the clicks and pops on your audio. But meanwhile, still have your P2P clocked correctly for the video sync to occur.
Fredrik, I'm curious as to your thoughts on this because I know Axis do a lot of work in the higher education space where you've got big classroom setups. So again, for you, what is your default reference architecture for like a 200-room campus?
I think what Cal just said is essentially the same thing. I mean, make sure that you have a VLAN that spans the different networks. Run the multicast on top of that and put the QoS on the VLAN. So make sure that you have the right priority on top of the data traffic that goes over those switches, because otherwise you will have the pops in the audio.
And I think to answer the question even that you had asked about the 10 gig, like when to go to 10 gig, I think that whenever you're dealing at this point, switch to switch or switch to switch trunking, that should be a 10 gig today, right? I mean, the cost of a 10 gig port is extremely low cost compared to what it was before, right? And thinking about it, you can easily overrun a 1 gig port with a single, with 2 encoders, right, that are putting out video. So switch to switch 10 gig, right? But it's still 1 gig to the actual device. I think today it still is where it is.
I was going to say, would you still do that though if you're dealing with legacy networks? Would you pay for the cost to go up to the 10 gig to avoid the problems?
If you had a legacy network that was just all 1 gig, in between, I think that if in that case, I would look at it not being a converged network. I would go with a separated network, an air-gapped network too, because you're going to cause more problems in the end for yourself trying to fight, the 1 gig connection than having the ample bandwidth. Because like Zach said, that is one of the things that we take calls on regularly and support is bandwidth, network physical deployments, and things like that, right? So if you can nip that before you even start, you're going to be better off in the long run and avoid costs.
Yeah. I think maybe to this topic, one of the things that we're seeing in the AV industry a little bit is that we're asked to go further. And I think your question is a scale question, right? Look, a large campus. What if it's 3,000 rooms? What if it's streaming across, an entire campus? We've talked a lot about, broadcast domains and stuff, but that's all a layer 2 problem, right? What happens when we have to traverse the layer 3? What happens when we need to have networked audio routed to some place where you're not on the same clocking domain? And I think, Dante's actually done really good at that. Dante domain managers out there, they're allowing you to stream across subnets. It's a routed layer 3 protocol at that point, which I think the AV has expanded. The requirements have expanded. It was nice to have, my little broadcast domain or VLAN or whatever. We now have to think about how do we get broader than that. And I think that talks to the scalability that you're asking about.
Yep. I want to switch to security for a second here. And Fredrik, I'm going to start with you because Axis has their SBOM and all sorts of other bits and pieces. But what's your 2025 minimum security baseline for networked AV RFPs? Is it device identity, on-the-wire encryption, MACsec, SBOM, patch cadence? I mean, what's your go-to for security?
Well, cybersecurity. We could talk an hour just on that topic, right?
Absolutely.
But I think, all the different acronyms aside, I think SBOM is one thing, and the EU has mandated that all the devices has to provide an SBOM, so we're compliant with that since 2 years ago or so. I think it's interesting. You're kind of forced to give out what is the recipe for your software, so people can understand what's actually inside there, what potential threat can be there. You guys, I don't expect you to understand all the different, software parts, but security researchers do, and they can use that in order to do a threat assessment of your different software. So I think it's really important to do that. I mean, even if you're not in the European Union, I think it's important to have that transparency from manufacturers that this is what our products are made up of.
Kyle, I'll get you to respond.
I think the big thing is the SBOM. I would agree, right? Being open and transparent about what it is, what makes it up, both on the hardware and the software side, to any potential risks or exposures. But it's also about securing it on the wire, right? So acronyms such as 802.1x and LDAP. TLS, security certs, and things like that, right? Purposefully keeping it, secure as well as allowed is important, right? And that's, FIPS, FIPS 140-3 is a huge protocol and certification path where, a lot of, that used to be a big thing for defense, but we're seeing more and more of that in the corporate environment now because of the layers of security and assurance that brings with it.
Okay. Anything you want to add to that, Zach?
I mean, I agree with everything said. Maybe I can just talk from Biom's standpoint of what we're being asked for. And I agree with your stance that corporate security is skyrocketing up.
Yeah.
I mean, we support 802.1x as a standard across any network port. We're being asked for pen testing all the time too. So now that's just kind of a common practice for us to go through. Generally that answers questions for our customers. The AV people are like, I don't know, what do you have, Biamp? And we're like, well, here's the pen test. And usually that, suffices for security needs. From a encryption standard, we don't actually play in that as much. We let the protocols play. So I know, Dante's coming out with some encryption and stuff too. And we look at enabling those features when the protocol enables them. So that's maybe how we keep up with the security stance. And certificate authentication, I guess, is the other one that I would throw on there. But that's, again, devices touching the network and proving that they're allowed to be there, I guess.
Yeah. Sorry, did you want to touch?
Yeah, I definitely want to add, encryption can be a bit hard to set up, and not everyone is proficient to set it up correctly. So I think from my point of view, I want to ensure that my products, they are secure by default. So when you set up a product, they should be, set up encryption by themselves, so you can secure that. So you don't have to rely on that someone else has set up things like 802.1x or MACsec or stuff like that. Because if someone gets into your network anyway, that won't help you.
Yeah.
So you need to ensure that whatever your protocols that you have are secure, and when you're doing encryption of our audio by default, so you cannot eavesdrop and you cannot inject anything into the audio stream without being properly authenticated and meeting the TLS certificates and all of that.
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
I was just to kind of play off what you said. You're right. But encryption now introduces interoperability issues, right? So that it's fine whenever you're device to device and you own both sides of that, it's much easier. But the challenge now is, how do I do that across somebody else's device, right? And there are ways, I keep going back to Dante because I do have a solution for that, and I'm sure there's others. The standardization is becoming more important because of things like encryption, right? It's harder to make that happen and maintain the security levels.
You're right, and it's not always possible to do it.
Yeah. Frederick, you touched on MACsec, so Kyle, I'm going to go to you for this one. Are customers actually deploying MACsec end-to-end in AV networks yet, and where does it hurt?
I'm sorry, say that one more time. I apologize.
Are customers actually deploying MACsec end-to-end in their AV networks yet? And if so, where is it harming the network?
I think as far as our customers go, the answer is they're not deploying MACsec, right? I think that they are relying on, physical layer at the port, 802.1x, TLS and security certs and things like that there. I think that, to what Zach said, right? When we start getting into encryptions and things like that, interoperability becomes very complicated very quickly. And that's where it drives at the end is the confusion of, well, where does the problem at now, right? We use Dante, right? When Dante releases this new update that'll enable this encryption, if one side doesn't have it, but the other side does, whose fault is that, right? Is it our fault? Is it, their fault, for not turning it on or for having it on? So, that's where, having that standard and the understanding of the education piece of to use it, basically.
Frederick, I know cybersecurity is something that's extremely important to Axis. When we talk about deploying end-to-end MACsec, is this something you're leaving up to the customer, or is this something that you're driving from your end?
Well, we do support it, but to be honest, I mean, it's really up to between a system integrator and the end customer if they want to use it or not. Honestly, I don't hear people actually deploying it, but it might be that I'm not part of that discussion.
Yeah.
But we do operate, due to our focus on security cameras, we do operate in militaries and governments all over the world. So I assume a lot of people use it, but when it comes to military projects, they will never, ever tell us what they do.
Yeah, which is pretty standard. I mean, Dak, from your perspective, are you hearing much about this yet?
I would agree with everybody. We're not.
Yeah.
It's
Okay. So, Kyle, I'll stick with you on this one.
Okay.
When you do choose a highly compressed H.26, whatever it's going to be, AV over IP for WAN enterprise video versus visual lossless latency options, translate that choice into business outcomes / latency, bandwidth, image fidelity. Like, how do you go through that?
Sure. So, I think that, looking at it and looking at the application at that point is important. Boardroom, learning and lecture and things like that, right? Where the viewer, the audience has a perception of the live event is where you want to have the maximum fidelity, right? So highest bandwidth, lowest compressions, that's important, right? In applications such as digital signage, wayfinding, those applications where there isn't a physical reference to that live event, then H.264, 265, AV1, whatever those codecs are, with that higher latency but lower bandwidth becomes more applicable because bandwidth in the internet is expensive to move from point A to point B through the ISPs at this point, right? So, the less bandwidth you can use becomes more efficient and cost effective in the end.
Yeah. Frederick, anything you'd like to add to that?
Not on that topic, no.
Okay. Anything you want to add?
I would agree. I think those are maybe to highlight what you said there. If you look for systems that give you the opportunity to just utilize the tools for the reasons you just said, like you're going to get the low latency, but it's going to cost you in bandwidth and you can't compress as much and and that's the performance standard. And then there's the streaming standard maybe, but it's much more lenient in that case. So I would just say, keep an eye on the tools. We make systems where you can dial in what you want based off what your needs are.
Yeah. I want to jump to a subject now that I think is becoming more popular, which is, the AI and UX crossover sort of and user outcomes. So AI claim check, BIAM's AI noise reduction and auto tuning, and then Axis as well has audio analytics that measure deltas and all sorts of bits and pieces. Should customers demand before they pay for it? What should customers demand before they pay for AI features? And I'll start with you on this one, Zach, and then we'll go to you, Frederick.
Well, I think the philosophy in AI is it's either got to increase performance or it's got to make somebody's life easier. Yeah, and I think the two that you mentioned from BIAM do both of those, right, or one or the other. So, using AI to increase performance, that's where our AI noise reduction comes in. We are making use of new technologies and new algorithms, a machine learned algorithm in this case, that can make the performance of a system better. So now tapping, clapping, whatever is not being transmitted to the far end. So we look at AI as a mechanism to increase performance. We've got other ways to do it. And then making the life easier, the UX part that you mentioned, and in our launch protocol, that's the auto tuning stuff is BIAM launch. We utilize the RIM components to go out and tune the system. And what that really means is we can make system turnover or deployment much faster for the end user, less downtime. It's easier for the integrator. save the expertise for the highly complex systems down the hall, but for a conference room, push a button and rely on AI to go in and do what it does and tune the system up and make the choices that ultimately need to be made, but do it in a expedited, easy fashion. So I think those are the two things that we are focusing on, is how can AI improve performance, or how can AI modify the user experience in a positive way?
Frederick, I know this is something that Axis has been focusing on, the use of AI in audio. Can you tell us a little bit about that from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, I mean, we started with video analytics in our cameras, and that's been available for almost 20 years now. And it's always been, hard to, set the right expectations. Well, what can customers expect from the solution? Especially 20 years ago, I mean, the movie industry created a very false sense of what you could expect from analytics, and how you can look at the mirror in the paint of a car, and you run image enhancement for like 4 hours, and they magically appear a face out of that. So I don't really like talking about AI in itself. I think for AI to become a useful tool, it's become something that becomes part of a solution that solves a problem for you guys, and not selling AI in itself. I know it's a cool buzzword to talk about, but I mean it's a business outcome that's really important.
So,
And it's the expectation management is definitely here. And from audio analytics point of view, we just recently started to deploy audio analytics in some of our products. We still have to do that in our speakers, but that's definitely coming. From our point of view, I mean, it's a tool that helps you work with the products as a sensor, and the more sensors you have in the system, the better the complete solution can become.
I think you really hit the nail on the head on the question too. What should customers be looking for in AI? I don't think they care. They're looking for the outcome experience, and that's what they're expecting. And if AI can help get there, if that's the proper tool, then yeah, use that tool. But it's really about what I want to accomplish as an end user or a customer. And I think that's a very good point.
So I'm disappointed though, Frederick, if I'm understanding what you're saying I can't take a photo of a car license plate with my iPhone from 100 meters away and blow it up to the size of a building and read it. Wow, that's disappointing.
Maybe if you're in the movie industry.
Yeah, well, okay, fair enough. All right, look, Cole, did you have anything you wanted to add to that before we throw it out to the audience for questions?
No.
Okay. Have we got any questions from the audience that you'd like to ask the people on the panel while you've got them here? Don't all trip over yourselves. Put your hands up at once. Is this just because I've thrown so many acronyms out here during the no one actually knows what I've been speaking about for the last, because I'm not really sure I do. All right. Yes.
Yeah. Head over. Hang on.
Just on the topic of encryption and security protocols and all that sort of stuff, I'm starting to dip my toe into that at the moment and discovering how many of them are out there. Do you think there would ever be a time where there will be some sort of security protocol that would be required that AV protocols won't be able to achieve? Like, do you reckon there would be a cat, like on a vision protocol or something like an audio protocol where, yeah, granted, audio has to arrive in a certain time in order for a clocking system to happily put it out without the latency bending. And if there's complicated algorithms and encryptions and stuff that lead to that not happening, does that sound like something you could conceivably think we would have to deal with in the future?
What's the lead off?
I think that as a manufacturer, right, as manufacturers, it's our responsibility to maintain the security standards that are out there and that are forthcoming, as well as to deliver the product as expected in the time necessary and not circumvent or shortcome when it comes to security, on the network.
There are definitely standards and I mean, performance issues if you require too high advanced encryption. And one way to solve that is, from a manufacturer point of view, is that we design with the right hardware, where you have hardware accelerators to run that encryption. So you don't really see the big bottlenecks.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that is one way to solve it is to modify hardware. I think there'll be
Expensive.
yeah, in that, yeah, exactly. So, there's a fine line to walk there. And then I think you have an interesting point. There's really two things. There's the adoption, and to be honest, I think AV always lags behind the IT side of things. So they're always going to be in front of us, and they really lead the way, right? So we aren't coming up with our own methods of doing this. So the adoption rate is how long does it take us to get there? So there's always going to be a delay in that. So we may be behind in that a little bit. But I think you make a good point of there may be situations where the outcome gets modified by the security protocol, and your point on latency is completely valid. Can I conceive that happening? Sure, totally. And I don't know how we deal with that except for isolation again, back to keeping us separate and dealing with other stuff there. So it's a good question. And can I conceive it? Yes. Do I know what to do with it? Not sure yet.
Any others? Yep, up the back there.
Hang on. Purposes of
If you just leave a really uncomfortable silence of
Sorry,
it.
since no one asked me a question, I ask one. I'm from broadcasting. I'm just here to hear all the new tech, protocols you're using and stuff in the AV market. Do you use in broadcasting? We started to do a lot of internet transport for WAN, for from venue to venue. Is that something used in the AV? And are you using things like SRTs, XCs, things like that, or is it different?
I would say, and I'm speaking from Biam's perspective as a manufacturer, we don't specifically offer that. And customers that are using our products generally come up with a streaming service. And that service is just a provided by somebody, their favorite streaming service, to get things from point A to B. I do believe that, Dante's making advancements on layer 3 routing capabilities. So maybe that's a mechanism that we would utilize. But ultimately, I think it's up to the integrator in our case to decide how they want to do that. The need is there, though, and we are seeing expectations are being there. From a conferencing standpoint, which is a big part of Biam's business, we actually don't need to handle it. Usually, the way the conferencing industry has gone today, Teams or Zoom or the UC codec is really what's leaving the room. And we don't have to deal with that as much. Again, we're relying on IT standards and companies like Microsoft to go out and provide that as a service.
No, I would agree with you on that one. I mean, I see the need for it. But again, a lot of that gets passed off to integrator, third-party provider to provide it.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to thank the panelists for their time, I think we're done.
And thank you very much, John, for facilitating that discussion.